Welcome, everyone. Today we're going back in time, over 2,000 years ago, to explore one of the most powerful civilizations in human history, the Roman Empire. The legacy of Rome is everywhere. In our laws, our government structures, our language, and even our architecture. From a small settlement on the banks of the Tiber River to a sprawling empire that covered most of Europe, parts of Africa, and the Middle East, the story of Rome is as complex as it is fascinating. So let's dive into the origins, the rise, the key achievements, and of course the fall of the Roman Empire. This video is an investigation into some of the multifaceted aspects of the history of the Roman Empire. Throughout these pages, we offer narratives describing its origins, rise, significant accomplishments, and eventual collapse. To this end, the chapters contained in this video concern themselves with not only a historical narrative, but also a detailed analysis of major themes running through and influencing the history of the Roman Empire, such as Roman culture, politics, military affairs, and diplomacy. The Roman Empire has continued to be of interest in the study of history, with the grey of academic frameworks changing in many ways. The Roman Empire itself has continued to hold relevance in more general discussions about governance, culture, and social principles since its inception and height in much of the world of the 5th century. It is this enduring relevance that has also driven many of the artistic and fictional representations working to further a continued and growing interest in Rome and in the Roman Empire. Historically, Romans are known for their strong sense of us and them, most starkly manifest in their use of household gods and ancestral spirits to unify extended families. Approaching Romans without acknowledging these strong local attachments and complex hierarchical allegiances is to miss much of what made the Roman world so intimately lived in and constructed. The Roman world was vibrant and changeable, with dynamic cultures often mixed together in complex urban environments, so different analyses often work through flows and exchanges across these various levels of scale and connection. What follows, by no means comprehensive, seeks to better illustrate these complexities of the Roman Empire. The research on the origins, evolution, and decline of the Roman Empire aims to provide a broader understanding of one of history's most influential societies, from the description of its origin to its collapse, its vision of man, and the world surrounding it. Within an increasing number of societies, which include very different peoples and civilizations, the Roman people took a holistic view of the social, political, and natural realities that they traversed over 2 millennia. Chronologically speaking, the examination of the design and functioning of this model will be completed once this evolution has ended, and their value related to the understanding of the underlying nature of the historical phenomenon. The research explores the study of sources throughout a greater number of disciplines, including the social and political structures present in different countries, the artistic and architectural manifestations of people, the ways of thinking about human society and individuals, their ethics, different forms of planning, as well as economic processes that facilitate their advancement. New monographs and extraordinary essays describing the genesis and historically significant details have continued to appear over the last decade, the man's tale through its retrospective vision. The purpose, as described here, is more comprehensive and is not limited to the presentation of a study of eminent historical personalities and key moments that can mark Roman imperial politics. This text seeks not only to update megatrends and already solidly established monographs, but it seeks to integrate previously dispersed topics to provide an overall revision that would permit competition to give a wider and deeper historical definition. To this end, in effect, we aim to challenge our object and seek to achieve deductive reissue. By placing the subject's question at the center of our subject, we take comparative history and use it as a rethinking tool. The Roman Empire stands as the quintessential image of Western and European civilization. Indeed, many of the cultural, political, and religious aspects of these societies were influenced by Rome. Rome was not always the image of imperial power, however. During its early days, it was exactly the opposite. Ancient documentary evidence regarding the origins of Rome consists of both myth and history, both of which served the ancient Romans to understand the beginnings of their city. The stories of the founding of Rome belong to the realm of myth and legend. In brief, the Romulus and Remus legends tell us that their supposed grandfather was Aeneas, a mythical figure who left his native Troy in order to preserve its royal line. After the necessary wanderings, Aeneas arrived in Italy, where he and his descendants formed the Roman people. In terms of ancient literature, three sources are important for the study of the formation of Rome: the poems of Livius Andronicus, written in the 3rd century BCE, and the works of Polybius and Dionysius of Halicarnassus. Livius Andronicus's works contain the oldest Latin writings that tell us of Rome's origins. While they are not a coherent narrative, they discuss the earliest Roman customs concerning both social and religious practices. These stories served as the founding myths of Rome, and literature through the ages has maintained their importance, as is seen in Virgil's well-known work. It is unknown whether or not Rome was founded in 753 or 716 BCE, or some other time. The myths are, however, situated within a context that is important for understanding authentic history. The Tiber River Valley, and the Palatine Hill in particular, served as a common trade route for the neighbouring people of Campania. Consequently, the Latins developed into a trading people from the contact of the three cultures. Iron Age Etruscans resided to the north and also proved to be important to the development of early Rome. They are best known for their art, particularly in funerary portraitures, more so than for their physical culture. Giant Etruscan tombs called mounds were excavated in Tarquinia over the recent years and revealed significant painted frescoes. The exchange of technology between the two cultures enabled the Romans to engage in larger fashion with the wider Mediterranean network through the unknown names originating in Antioch at the time. Additionally, large pieces of human bone were recovered during excavation due to Etruscan spirituality, which had complex beliefs surrounding the importance of the afterlife. Also present were massive quantities of grave goods placed next to the dead.
The founding myths of ancient Rome are among the most famous of the West. The story of twins Romulus and Remus being raised by a she-wolf leads ultimately to the foundation of the city in 753 BC and offers a captivating account of national origins that is equal parts history, poetry, and legend. It is impossible to fully reconstruct Rome's pre-imperial history, and impossible too to disentangle the historical aspects of the foundation stories from those that are mythological. But the stories of the kings, the Senate, and the early Republic are bound together with the creation of Rome itself. By exploring these legends, this text aims to engage with literary history, cultural studies, and ancient identity. The myths of Rome are both ancient and early. They already cut across the distinction drawn by later historians between kings and consuls, between the kings and the Republican era. They reflect and often help to shape the beliefs and values of the earliest Romans, who first began to see themselves as a unique people. As symbols of Rome, the legends about its origins have a long and respected literary history. Roman writers engaged with these ancient stories, manipulating and interpreting the myths in light of their own times. These narratives of national origin were also explored by Roman historians, for whom they represented the central polarities of fortune and virtue. Due to Rome's mixed population, attempts to unify and cohere by common historical and especially mythological origins became paramount. The myths of Rome were part of a web of rhetoric, literature, and visual arts that served as propaganda, education, and populism. The importance of origins was noted in both the preface and the body of various works. The literary importance of Rome's early reign of the kings was often diminished. There was a preference to look back at the freedom of the early Republic, when Rome was defined simply as a city rather than an empire.
The story of the Roman Empire is not a classic rags to riches tale, but of course the Romans hated the classic. They were themselves masters of history, valiant heroes of their own stories, and in their world everything was more, better, nobler and grander than anything that had come before. Theirs were the only truly great achievements. Everything else was smaller, lesser, except where their greatness had touched it. It is not surprising to find, therefore, that many roads in the archaeological record and in our historical understandings lead back to and occasionally meander through Rome. It was very much a case of voluntary memory, something that was occasionally imposed upon others. So, how did Rome come to impress itself upon the world? The world that was known and that really mattered to the tiny minority, telling the stories and leaving behind the written and sometimes the charred evidence of their doings. Following periods of slow accumulation, dominated by the so-called founding period of the city and the equally slow picking off of neighbors, Rome's expansion was essentially exponential. Rome and the period of Roman dominance starts at the end of this phase of phenomenal growth and rapid expansion, as a fringe Italian player in the wider Mediterranean world. Within a few generations, it had overtaken all of its Italian rivals and competitors. Within 50 years of these major victories, his successors saw Roman armies and administrators in Anatolia, Greece, and Carthage, and by the 2nd century BC there was already a large and permanent Roman presence in both northern Africa and the Spanish Far West. By the time of the transformation of the Mediterranean into a Caesarized empire, soon simply the empire, the western extent of Roman power extended to what is today the Atlantic-Spanish border with Portugal, Britain, and with their oldest enemy neutralized, the eastern edge of the Adriatic. How did the Romans do it?
The early Roman Republic was a society of farmers, while the late Republic was urban and diversified, hinging on control of an empire. Expansion and conquest are the hallmarks of the rise of Rome from a relatively small Italian city-state to the dominion of the Mediterranean. By the end of the 1st century BC, Roman territory extended from the western Mediterranean along the southern shore to include Greece and Asia Minor. Roman emphasis on military supremacy in part accounts for the astoundingly rapid increase in the size of Roman territory among the Italian city-states. Though driven by political and strategic considerations, the Romans also controlled the direction of much of the conquest of the Hellenistic period. The development of an agricultural economy that was destroyed under the disruption of war and could only recover under an empire contributed to Roman success. War and the serious possibility of extermination threaten the loss of a way of life and inevitably lead to a soldier's psychology. It is natural that Roman military tactics under Romulus and the first kings reveal the struggle between Latin and Etruscan influences. Etruria is an inveterate enemy, and the indecisiveness and anticipated suddenness of combat represent the strategy of a discontinuous terrain. Maniples produced a highly effective counter to the shorter thrusting sword of the heavy infantry, which had been the Macedonians' decisive weapon. The scutum of the Roman militia was a good defense for a small force, crowded close in and supported by the standing second rank. The small independent forts that were built to house the legions in peacetime also controlled their supply lines and gave early warning of a rebellion in the provinces when a march on the capital was still possible. Roman roads were part and parcel of the army. For the Romans, defeat and extermination only await those who appear able to endure it, but a respite from the terrifying prospect can be obtained by those who pretend to be unable to endure it. Thus, Rome always knew from the beginning that the enfranchised cities of Italy could unite and revolt, and the places were well chosen and fortified. They were a good basis for survival if the Italians won, and at the same time they kept a clear corridor to the Neapolitan and Etruscan connections.
The Roman system of government was an extremely sophisticated one developed through many centuries of experience in the management of Italy and first a local, then a Mediterranean empire. It was an odd mixture of formal and informal, with functional elements supplementing constitutional ones already in late Republican times, and these were further developed by the empire. The essential bipartite division of power entrusted the governance of the city and the Western Roman world to an emperor who took into his own hands an increasingly large share of military and civil authority, next only to the unfunded civilian class of the Roman hierarchy, the senators, were those equestrians who held no public office. Other units of 3 to 5 Roman or local citizens usually formed Rome's basic units of local government, the municipia and colonies, but also councillors in the Greek and less sophisticated native communities of the eastern provinces. Under the late Republic, the two democratically elected annual magistrates, the consuls, were the chief civil, military and religious officials of the Roman people and the city, and their formal authority at the political centre was both vast and decisive. Their election or appointment to command an army was supervised by the Senate, and once they were in office could be modified or countermanded by the senators, who had the right to speak out on all matters and who almost always voted as a bloc. These senior officers of state were the best men of Rome, elected en bloc for life, then surviving until they were unseated, while the rest of government continually mutated through new elections and office holders as well. These were Rome's problem-solving team. In the place of the millennia-old concept of gentlemen teamed in families in aristocratic factions, the enormous and heterogeneous empire had a civil service system which filled itself by shifting local worthies up or down through a series of locally significant mini-webs, without losing them at cross paths, and in some cases, despite corpuscular motion. The Roman Empire is known for its heady mix of innovative engineering, distinctive architecture, and impressive military might. Here are just some of the key achievements of what was perhaps the most remarkably powerful entity of ancient history: concrete. The discovery of how to make cement is perhaps the Romans' greatest single contribution to human civilization. Herod's temple, the Colosseum, and the Pantheon were all built using it, and so, of course, were vast numbers of Roman aqueducts which helped to transform the empire's capital, Rome, into a city of the world for hundreds of years. Just as impressively, modern chemical analysis of Roman mortars and cements reveals that even failed structures feature superior quality concrete compared with modern mixes. Aqueducts. The Roman practice of building aqueducts is one of the key reasons it lasted so long. Aqueducts were very expensive to build, but their maintenance costs were relatively low. Aqueducts even helped different provinces to specialize in providing some things the Roman Empire found useful. Wine and olive oil, for example, could be produced in one region and shipped across Roman-held territory, which was an unbelievable boon in an era when fossil fuels were unknown. In periods when the Roman state extended its control within Italy and over adjacent parts of Gaul, Spain, and North Africa, the empire's coastlines were developed to produce major aqueduct-fed export surpluses in cereal crops for the empire's burgeoning productive urban populations. When tied to similar initiatives in its northwestern territories, Rome was almost invincible.
Architecture and engineering. The Roman enthusiasm for architectural innovation resulted in the construction of a vast array of buildings, the skills to build and maintain them, and the power to manage and supervise the vast resources needed to maintain a standing state-building program. Among the lasting and widespread Roman architectural and engineering contributions are the roads, the use of the arch, and the vault and dome construction techniques. The extensive road network of the Roman state allowed the legions to move rapidly and in strength in defense, reinforcements, or attack, blockades to be set up and maintained, and reliable policing. All Roman roads were built with the highest road construction techniques used at the time. The layering consisted of solid roadbeds, gravel traps, cobblestones, and dressed stones. The Romans excelled in the art of the arch as a construction element. The simplest arch built by the Romans was the semicircular arch. The Romans also made extensive use of the segmental and pointed arches in domestic and commercial buildings, where it was the easiest way to span cantilevered walls side by side with wooden beams. The techniques of the construction of the arch enabled the Romans to build the first reliable bridges across difficult river gorges. Just as in the construction of the arch, the Romans used the art of vault building from a very high technological conscious base, typified in the first place by the erection of domes. Architectural creations such as the Pantheon and the baths in Rome, the thermal baths in Trier, and the imperial bathing complex in Austria resulted from the supportive knowledge of vaults and domes by the Roman engineers. The principles behind the construction of the vaults and domes are remarkably the same as those used in the construction of the arches. Roman architects used even heavier materials like thick limestone masonry to avoid any form of danger in the utilization of the arch to construct vaults and especially domes. The dome structure in use since Etruscan times became the Roman contribution to architectural history. The Romans excelled in the improvement of an equipment to lift heavy concrete blocks and marble tiles up to the desired heights, so that a large, lofty dome did not depend on high arches anymore, paving the way to the Gothic cathedrals hundreds of years later. Literature and philosophy. Many of the greatest names in Roman literature date to the Augustan period. Some of the best-known figures of Roman letters include the poets Virgil, Horace and Ovid, the historians Livy and Tacitus, and the essayist, moralist and humorist Seneca. The story of Roman literature remains dominated by these figures, despite the fact that the majority of written texts left to us are of lesser authors or of unknown origin. Roman literature was an active, vibrant form of artistic expression that maintained a distinctive rhetorical form on the one hand and a well-established set of themes and topics on the other. The vigor and application of talented Roman writers were central in the preservation and improvement of Latin prose and poetry. One of the great Roman inventions was the public library. The first known library was established by Asinius Pollio. The great private libraries of the wealthy, however, have been the main source of information about the extent and range of Roman library collections due to their home-based workshops and themes. The primary function of libraries was to collect and store a wide range of written works in order to make it available and easier to consult. Roman libraries were also regulated and used as a desirable place of study. A well-managed library was a center of great knowledge, rich in research and intellectual resources for scholars. The best example, preserved virtually intact in form and size, is the Villa of the Papyri, located near Herculaneum and buried beneath the lava exploded by Vesuvius. Part 4. Fall. The Romans were especially savvy about the lessons they could learn from the past. This explains the historic appeal of the fall of the Roman Empire and the lessons and conclusions historians and writers have drawn from it. The most obvious reason for the fall of the Roman Empire is its economy. The Roman Empire itself was not a free market economy. Such a system of wealth creation was beyond the ideology and experience of history, of the conquering and slave-owning classes. As the Romans developed, productive forces stagnated. The essence of having a productive force is being able to add value to it. Production and exchange were productive processes, as neither added value as such. While most societies have had exchange, production under small-scale conditions was largely local or command, and there were few captains of industry in antiquity. Most commodities were durable or subsistence goods that were long-lasting and relatively cheap because they were produced by slaves. Other reasons often suggested for the fall of the Roman Empire include political decay. Rome had a colonial political structure that was based on a ruling oligarchy, and conquered territories could become coloniae. The principal apparatus of the Roman state was military power over vast territorial concepts like Italy, Spain, Africa, or Asia. The allegiance of slaves to freedom was always dubious because of the nature of the state, the unfreedoms within the empire, the lack of interest in the labor theory of value, and despotic power. In truth, the decline and fall of the slave system was brought about by the nature of forced labor, which directly reduced productivity and was high cost, including the profits lost through death by overexertion. The prodigality of the timeless and universal master class, complete with tax breaks and corporate statuses, eventually brought the late slave-based empire to its knees. Experience shows that once in a century, that kind of thing can bring a system down. Economic decline and inflation. After 235 AD, the Roman Empire began experiencing a near-continuous government collapse on a local and international basis. Economic decline was a significant contributor to the subsequent threats and, ultimately, a catalyst for continuous crises within the state. Overall, the challenge of the Roman economy and the state's responses are suggestive of the complex and comprehensive challenges it was facing in the later stages of its development. During the 1st century BC, the Romans had enacted various systems to prevent or deal with economic issues as they arose. Rome was committed to a fixed map of its rivals to expand. Between 300 and 500 AD, there was a continuing downturn, an economic depression in accordance with the recognition of some historians. The result of evolving Roman policy was a state that was both overvaluing the silver contained in its currency and financially exhausting the majority of its subject population. This century also saw a series of damaging inroads into the human populations of Rome following the death of local slave labor and the migration of the traditional barbarian invaders into the Roman Empire. Overall, policy choices and societal traditions have developed in an ever-increasing sense of inevitability in the collapse of socio-economic order. The connection between this and the political composition of the Roman world is made particularly evident throughout the long-running chain of domestic and internationalized wars that forged and then collapsed the Euro-Mediterranean world. Military challenges and barbarian invasions. Towards the end of the 2nd century CE, the military situation also deteriorated for both external and internal reasons. Internally, Rome was destabilized by a series of civil wars, which eroded both discipline and effectiveness of the armed forces. Externally, the apparent lack of military resources in the eyes of foreign enemies encouraged them to threaten Roman authority. Their armies started a series of raids and skirmishes that soon would lead to larger military operations. In the 160s, Germanic invaders occupied some mainly agricultural regions in today's Austria, and between 166 and 177, important parts of Syria and Egypt were under the control of Parthian invaders. In the early 4th century, the army suffered further checks, especially by Persians and Germanic tribes along the Rhine. However, the situation at the borders became most difficult once again towards the middle of the century. In 375, the Huns, a powerful people from Central Asia, appeared on the borders from the east and caused widespread destruction. This prompted several Germanic tribes to seek permission from Emperor Valens to cross the Danube and settle in the Balkans. However, they were met and defeated by Roman forces in 378 at Adrianople, and the emperor lost his life in the battle. The Gothic invaders fragmented over time, but groups of Visigoths who arrived first and Vandals who arrived later were actually able to acquire an independent kingdom or had an independent power base in Gaul and Hispania. The Visigoths sacked the city of Rome in 410, and the Vandals wreaked havoc in the western Mediterranean when they sacked Carthage and settled in North Africa. These were heavy blows to the image of the invincibility of Rome, but the consequences should not be overestimated. Both invaders were eventually destroyed by Roman forces composed of foederati, and although the invasions contributed to the difficulties of the Western Empire, they did not signal the doom of the West. However, the invasions of the 5th century accentuated several long-term weakening social and economic trends, and eventually led to a reconfiguration of West and East. The central role of tribes in the developments of the 5th century confirms the weakness of Roman military power at the borders, but also tends to underestimate the role of empire internal developments in the ultimate fall of the West. This is what I will return to in section 3.2. Conclusion. This is the conclusion of the paper, offering a summary of what has already been presented and suggestions for future research. This paper synthesizes the rise, achievements, and fall of the Roman state into a coherent narrative by interweaving comments on all these, rather than dedicating separate parts or chapters to them. The object was not to study them as disconnected events, nor as a series of disconnected situations which studies and scholars normally present them to be. Rather, they are to be seen as the outcome of the same root cause. The greatness of Rome and its significance in the Roman Empire can only be understood if we broaden our horizon of analysis, its time frame, and our approach, to see the Roman world empire and its history as an interrelated whole. The Romans could have taught us the sport and art of nation and state building. On a different level, they prove that history does not repeat itself, but it rhymes in a way with the lessons from Thucydides and his visions of power, fears, and honor, of human nature shaped by human conditions. There are other reasons why it would be important to explore the evidence brought together to construct this narrative. Remaining for thousands of years in historiography and imagination, the processes and outcomes, as well as the sheer greatness of the Roman Empire, outstrip all other states of any age within our cultural world. For scholars, it is doubly exciting that within the 700 years of the empire's history, only a small part of it is studied with a level of detail and expertise that would do credit to any modern historian, and that a relatively narrow slice of the evidence supports the bulk of that which is thoroughly studied. Recent scholarship has, though, attempted to rebalance the picture by providing an impressive analysis of the frontiers of the Danubian provinces and of areas such as military equipment. In addition, work continues on regions that have always been good sources of comparison to the Western or Mediterranean examples, such as China. In general, there is still so much to learn from Rome, and it remains substantially true that Rome is a country in which close study promises rewards as great as one cares to make them. Redressing the lack of understanding of sections of the Roman state and of individual provinces surely remains a worthy ambition for historians. Summary of findings. The findings of our process of considering the Roman Empire underscore assumptions that have long been held. In the case of the Roman Empire, its origin, its rise, its achievements, and its fall are the four components that make up the structure of a narrative of Roman history. Anticipated by a rich panoply of stories regarding the foundation of the city of Rome, and sustained by a political culture that affirmed Rome as a naval power from the middle part of the 3rd century BC, Rome's rise as a Mediterranean power was also facilitated by the conflicts among its major competitors in the Western Mediterranean and the consequent weakness of Pyrrhus, Carthage, and Hellenistic colonial centers. Rome's rise was also stabilized when it countered serious threats to its position in the Western Mediterranean. We have studied the most hectic period in the history of the Roman state, one that encompasses internal conflicts among Roman aristocratic factions that ultimately transform the Republic into a principate, then increasingly into the autocratic political system known as the Dominate. With the integration of substantial parts of the Mediterranean region as well as Northern Europe into a common economic and, more importantly, cultural space, the Roman Empire generated a number of enduring achievements. From architectural and legal reforms to the codification of literature, Roman civilization left its mark on the history of Europe and North Africa. The fall of the Roman Empire was neither as sudden nor as shocking as it sounded to 18th century ears. Multiple interconnected problems that confronted Roman economic and military systems increasingly led to violence-driven transformations in the social and political identities of peoples on the Roman frontier. And yet, while the empire and its various constituent parts as the Romans knew them may have crumbled in the Middle Ages, empire as an abstract political possibility adapted and was adapted to a dizzying array of contexts. Rather than sounding the death knell of a 1,000-year-old political tradition, The fall of the Roman Empire ultimately was an acknowledgement that viewers could continue, and likely would continue, to learn from Roman political philosophy. Although the Roman Empire fell, its legacy lives on. Rome's influence on law, government, language, architecture and culture shaped Western civilization and continues to impact us today. The Roman legal system laid the groundwork for modern law codes, and many of our democratic institutions were inspired by Roman governance. Latin, the language of the Romans, evolved into the Romance languages we speak today: Spanish, French, Italian, and Portuguese. Roman engineering marvels like aqueducts, roads, and public baths have left their mark on cities across Europe. The concept of Pax Romana inspired later leaders to seek peace and stability, and the Roman Catholic Church, which emerged from the empire, spread Roman culture and religion across the globe. In many ways, Rome never truly died. Its influence continues to echo throughout history, and its story is a reminder of both the heights that human civilization can reach and the lessons of overextension, ambition, and resilience. Thanks for joining me on this journey through the Roman Empire. If you find this fascinating, don't forget to like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments what other historical empires you'd like to explore. Until next time, keep learning and keep exploring history's incredible stories.